Welcome everyone to this 5-part Blender tutorial series where I'm going to show you how to create this Sci-Fi Airlock or Sci-Fi Corridor artwork in Blender. Now this tutorial series is created for more intermediate Blender users, so unlike most of my tutorials on my YouTube channel, I'm not going to be saying every single shortcut key that's pressed, and the pacing of this tutorial series will be a little bit faster. And this is just something that I'm trying out because I have gotten some tutorial requests to make some more intermediate level tutorials. So if you're very new to Blender or you're more of a beginner, then this tutorial might be a little too fast paced. Now I am going to have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing, but I'm not going to be saying every single shortcut key that I'm using, and I'm going to be working a little bit faster. But as long as you have the main shortcuts down and you know the basic workflow of creating something in Blender, then you can definitely follow along with this tutorial. And I would like to get your feedback in the comments if you like these more intermediate level tutorials. I know that many of my viewers are more beginner level users, but I'm sure there's some people out there who would benefit from some more intermediate level tutorials. So definitely let me know in the comments if you like these types of tutorials and would like to see more of them, or if you prefer the very slow paced, beginner friendly tutorials. So in part 1, we're going to start by modeling the basic tunnel. And then in part 2, we're going to finish all the modeling by modeling the back wall and the airlock doors at the end of the tunnel. And then in part 3, we're going to start with the texture painting. So we're actually going to be texture painting bump maps, and we're going to texture paint all of those sci-fi details on the wall and all of the metal. And then in part 4, we're going to do more texture painting and we're going to set up the lighting. And then in part 5, we'll be finishing up the texture painting and we'll do a little bit more modeling and then just finish the scene, render the image, and do the compositing to get this finished artwork here. Now because I'm going to be doing texture painting, I will be using my drawing tablet, but you definitely don't need a drawing tablet. You can use a mouse if you want to. Now I usually always recommend using a drawing tablet for texture painting, especially when you're texture painting more organic objects. But in this tutorial series, we're texture painting very rigid sci-fi details, and so using a drawing tablet isn't actually as important. So you can use a mouse and follow along with the tutorial and do the texture painting. I will still be using my drawing tablet though. And if you're interested in purchasing a drawing tablet, I will have some Amazon links in the description to some tablets that I recommend, and those are affiliate links, so if you purchase something through those links, that will help me out, but with no extra cost to you. And then one more thing before we start the tutorial, if you'd like to help support me and my YouTube channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, you can get access to 3D models and assets. You can also get access to procedural materials and artwork project files and other tutorial files like the tutorial files for this artwork here. And some great ways to support the channel here on YouTube is by checking out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on the join button next to the subscribe button. And you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip if you enjoy this tutorial series. So I'm just going to start by deleting everything, and then we need to create an object for the sci-fi tunnel. So to create this, I'm just going to start by adding a new cube. Now while we're doing the 3D modeling, it's really helpful to be able to see the edges of the objects. So what I'm going to do is click right here on the viewport shading, and what I'm going to do is turn on this cavity right here. And then right here on the type, I'm also going to turn this to both. And then I can also turn the ridge up and the valley up. So what this is going to do is kind of going to add like an ambient occlusion. And so you can see that on the edges here, it's really light. But if I like duplicate this object, you can see now the creases are kind of dark. So the creases are darker and then these parts are kind of lighter. And so it helps us to see the edges of the objects better. So I want to mirror this so that I only have to model one side. So let's go into edit mode, and I'm going to add a loop cut right here in the center. And I'm just going to drop the loop cut right there. And then I'm going to go into wireframe, and then I'm just going to box select this side here, and then I will just delete that side. So we can now go right here to the modifiers. Let's add a modifier, and I'm going to add the mirror modifier. Now I also want to model this object pretty close to the real life scale in Blender, and when you add the default objects, the default primitive objects are a little bit higher than an average human. So I'm just going to go back to object mode, and then I'm going to scale this object by 1.2 and then hit enter. So this way a person could walk through the Sci-Fi Corridor if you're comparing this to the real life scale in Blender. And then I also need to apply the scale because I scaled this object up, so I'll just apply the scale. Alright, so I'm going to go back into edit mode, and I now want to delete this face. So I'll go to the face select, and I'm just going to delete that face. face, and then I'll also delete the back face. And then also I need to turn on the clipping here on the mirror. So right over here, I'll just turn on clipping so that the mirror is connected. So now in edit mode, I'm just going to bring the entire tunnel up so that it is kind of resting on the grid. So just like that. And of course, don't forget to save the Blender file before you get too deep into your project, because if Blender crashes, you don't want to lose your progress. Now I want this sci-fi tunnel to have some cool edges here on the two sides. So I'm going to add a loop cut right here, and I'm just going to drop it in the center. And then I can go to front view. And then with this loop selected here, I'm going to bring it out on the x-axis, and I'm going to bring it out by about 1.5 grids. So you can see Blender has some grids. If you kind of zoom out, they're a bit easier to see. And I'm going to bring this out by about 1.5 grids. And I'll go into wireframe, and I'm also going to box select the bottom edge here. And this one I'll just bring in a little bit, so it's just about 1 grid out. And then I will select this one here, and this one I'm going to bring back a bit so it's closer to the mirror, and I'm just going to bring this one out so it's about 2/3 of a grid out, so just about that far. And then I can go to top view, and I just want to make sure that this is about 2 grids long. So if I kind of zoom out there, you can see it's a little bit too long, so I'm just going to scale this in, scale it in on the y-axis like that. Alright, so we can go back to object mode, and I now want to array this out. So let's go here to the modifiers. We can add the array modifier, and then we don't want to array it over on the x-axis, so let's turn the x to 0, and then we can turn up the y. We'll just turn the y to 1. And then we can turn up the count here. I'm just going to use a count of 5. So already we have a pretty cool tunnel. I also think it would be a good idea just to add a camera now, and that way when we're modeling things, we can always go back to the camera and just see how it looks in the camera view. So I'm just going to add a camera, and then you can press Control Alt Numpad 0 just to bring the camera to where you are, and then just kind of move the camera around, and I'm just going to place it about here. And then also I want this to be a square image, so I'm going to go right over here to the output properties, and I'm just going to make this a square image by having the X and Y resolution the same number. And you can use whatever resolution you want. Of course, the higher resolution, the longer it'll take to render. And I can maybe bring the camera in, and I want to stick it over here. You can play around with different angles and kind of get it to some angle that you like. I like it kind of being right over here to the side and kind of bring it down a little bit. And I definitely want to be able to see some of the sci-fi details there on the wall. And then I want to have this kind of over here in the center, but a little bit to this side. And then also I find that turning the camera's focal length up is a bit nicer. So I'm going to turn the focal length up to 70 because it kind of zooms the camera in and it just makes things look a bit more flat. So I like that a bit better. All right, so I now want to start to model all the sci-fi details. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and you can see that the other side is kind of in the way. So if you go here to the modifier properties, I can click on this button right here on the mirror. It is the display in edit mode, so I can turn that off, and that way when I'm in object mode I can see the entire mesh, but then in edit mode I can only see this half of the mesh. So I'll go to side view and I can kind of zoom in here. Now before we start with the modeling, I do want to flip the normals, because if you go back to object mode, you can go right here to the overlays, and if you turn on the face orientation, we only want to be able to see the blue side but not the red side. But of course this was a cube starting out, so it made sense that blue was outside. So in edit mode I'll just press Shift N to recalculate the normals, and I do need to click on the inside button right there to flip that, and then I can close this. And then back in object mode, I can just hide the face orientation there on the viewport overlays. All right, so let's start modeling this. So I'm going to start by just adding a loop cut here in the center so that we have a bit more faces to work with. And then I'm also going to add another loop cut just right here. So again, we have more faces to work with and they're more subdivided. So right over on this side, I want to model like some holes with some pipes. And then over on this side, I want to model like some cool panels. But to make your artwork look more unique, I definitely encourage you to look at some references and inspiration of other sci-fi corridors and kind of bash some different sci-fi ideas together to create your own cool sci-fi designs. So I'm just going to go here to the face select, and then I'm going to select both of these faces, and I'll just inset those faces. And then when you hit the I key once, the individual is turned off. You can see right up there on the top of the screen. But when you hit the I key again, it turns the individual on. So now there's a space between those faces. So I'll just bring that down there, and then I can just like extrude this back to about there. Then I'm going to select these two faces here, and I'll duplicate these over. And then I also want to scale these down by their individual origins. So right here on the transform pivot point, I can change this to individual origins, and I can kind of scale this down and kind of bring it in there. Maybe I'll bring it over, and then I can just like extrude that back. And then I can select these, and I need to recalculate the normals. And then I can select these faces here, and I want to duplicate them, kind of move them over here, and then I'm going to extrude that back. And then in edit mode, I'm going to add a new object. So let's add a cylinder, and then I want to turn the clipping off. So I'll just turn the clipping off there on the mirror. I can scale this way down, and I'm just going to move it over here, and I'm just going to kind of stick it in there, and then I can turn the clipping back on now. All right, so I'm now going to go to side view, and I'm going to rotate this over by 90 degrees, and I'll also scale it up on the y-axis, kind of stick it right in there. Scale up a bit more, just like that, so we're making some cool sci-fi pipes. So this is maybe transferring like energy, or maybe it's transporting oil or something in those pipes. Or it could also be some sort of oxygen supply as well. I'm also going to duplicate this and bring that down, and then you can press the L key to select the linked vertices, and I'll duplicate this again, and I'm just going to kind of stick it right there. Actually, I'm going to bring this down here, and then I will select this one and I'll just delete it because I think I just want to have one pipe, but you could of course make many different pipes or have pipes with different shapes or sizes. All right, so now that that's finished, over here on this side, I want to create some sci-fi plating. So I'm going to select both of these faces, and I'll just inset these faces, and I'll hit the I key twice so that there is that little gap in between the faces. And I'm actually going to just bring this out so that the gap is very small, place it there, then I can hit the I key again and inset that down. So I now want to create some triangles on the edges to give the panels a cool sci-fi shape. So I will use the knife tool, so hit the K for the knife tool, and then I'm just going to click right here, drag down, click there, and then hit enter. Just to cut the mesh, and I'll do the same thing down here. So use the knife tool, click, drag down, place that there, and then also right here, use the knife tool again. We're going to bring that down there. So I'm now going to select all of these 5 faces here, and I will inset these faces just like that. And then I'm going to select these 3 ones here, and I will actually extrude these ones out. And then I can select these ones, and I'm actually going to inset these back in. So I also want to create a separate object for the ground. So I'm going to select these 2 ground faces, and I'm going to duplicate this and move it up. And I can also bring it into the mirror a little bit. And then I'll press the P key, and I'm going to separate this by selection. So I can go back to object mode. I can just select this object here and go into edit mode of this object. And I'm going to go right here to the edge select. And I'm just going to select these 2 edges, and then I will extrude it down, just bring it down like that. I can also select the entire thing and maybe bring it in a little bit so there's kind of a gap there. And then on the floor, I want to add a little detail. So I'm going to add a loop cut, and I'm just going to bring the loop cut right there. And then I'm going to go to the face select, and I'm just going to select both of these faces, and I will extrude them back in, just to extrude that back there. So now we have that little inset there, and so it looks like the floor is made up of some different panels. All right, so that is it for the floor for now. So I'm going to select this object again and go back into edit mode. All right, so I'm now going to go here to the vertex select, and I'm just going to select these vertices here, and then I'll go to front view, and I'm going to duplicate these vertices, kind of bring them over here, and I actually want to bring them back right over there. And then I will extrude them out, bring it over on the x-axis, and I can also extrude this down, bring it down on the z, and then I can extrude that back, just like that. So now you can kind of see we have that little metal piece going along the side there. I also need to select this entire object, and I need to recalculate the normals. I also might scale it down a little bit so it's a little bit more thin, and I also might bring it out just a little bit. And then I'm going to add 2 loop cuts here, so I'll add a loop cut there. Also add another loop cut there, and then I'm going to go to the face select, and I'm just going to select these 2 faces right here, and I'll extrude them out just a little bit just to add a bit more detail. So there we go. And then I want to add a similar detail here on the roof, so I'm just going to select this one face here on the roof, and I'll duplicate this and bring it down, and I can also scale it way down. I'll just make that really thin, and then I'm also going to scale it up just like that. Maybe make it a little bit more thin and kind of bring it up, and then I can extrude it up just like that, and then we don't actually need that face there, so I will delete that face. And then I can select this entire object here, and I will recalculate the normals and maybe make it a bit more thin and bring it up a little bit. And then I can also duplicate the entire thing, and I'm going to bring it over on the y-axis, just kind of stick it right there so it's in the center. So now you can see we have some nice little details there on the roof. And if I go back into edit mode, I also want to add a little bit more details. So I'm going to select these 2 faces here, and I'm going to duplicate them and bring them down. And I can also scale it in, and I actually need to turn off the clipping. So right over here on the mirror modifier, I can just uncheck the clipping, and then I can bring this over, and I can also scale that down. And then I can turn back on the clipping now that it's not connected to the mirror. So I'm going to bring this over here, and then I can extrude the entire thing up there. And then we also don't need those faces there, so I'll just delete those faces. faces. And then it looks like we also have an extra face there, so I can just delete the faces there. And right over here, if I kind of zoom in here, we also have another extra face, and I don't want that because that's connecting with the array, so I can just delete that face there. And then I think I will also just select both of these pieces here, and I'm going to bring them in towards the mirror, and I'm just going to stick them right there so they just kind of go into that cube and then you can't see them. Alright, so I now want to create the lights which are on the top of the roof. So I'll go back into edit mode and I can just select this face here. I will duplicate this face and bring it down here, and then I want it to be its own object, so I'll hit the P key and just use the selection. Now you can see that because we separated it into its own object, the array got brought way back here. So if I open up the array right here, I just want to bring the factor Y out so that there is a bit more space. So I will make the offset 3, and that way it's going to be a bit longer. And you can't see the other side, and that's because of the mirror setting. So I'm going to click on this button right here to display it in edit mode, and I can just now bring that in, and then I can kind of extrude this up to make it a bit thicker. And then I will select the entire thing, and I'm going to bring it up and just stick it there into the ceiling. Maybe scale it down a bit smaller. Go into the camera view, just kind of see how that's looking. And I'm just trying to make this a size that I like, so kind of scaling it, something like that. I also need to turn up the count here. So on the array, I will just turn up the count so it goes all the way to the end of the tunnel. And then just select this face here, and I'm going to inset this face. And then after I inset the face, I need to hit the B key, and that's going to turn the boundary on and off. And I actually need to hit the I key twice and then hit the B key. So now the boundary is turned off and I can kind of bring that in. Place it there, and then I can just extrude that up to about there. And then just like many of the objects, I need to recalculate the normals again. That is good. Alright, so this is already starting to look pretty cool, but these walls here are very blank. So I will just select this object and I'll go into edit mode. So I'm first just going to start by selecting this face here, and I will duplicate this face, and then I can scale this down, and I'm going to scale it down on the y-axis. Kind of like that, and I can bring it over, and we're just going to make some more like sci-fi plating or sci-fi panels, and then I can just extrude that back. And then again, I need to select that entire object and recalculate the normals, and then I can just select this face right here, and I'm going to duplicate this face, bring it over so there's a little bit of space there, and then I'm going to extrude this entire face, and I'm going to bring it over to make a big plate there. And then I want to use the knife tool again to kind of cut a triangle on the side, just because I like how that looks. So I'll use the knife tool, and I'm just going to cut that right there. And then I also want to use the knife tool again and cut another one just right there. And then what I can actually do is just select that face there, and then I can just select all the faces around it. So that face there, and also that one down there, and then the one on the very back. And I actually just want to delete all these faces, and this way I can now just select these two faces, and I can just extrude them back. I'm now going to select this face again, and I'll just duplicate it, and I'm going to scale it way down, and then I want to scale it up, make that a bit longer. And I'm kind of just making some sci-fi details, maybe like some sci-fi boxes on the wall. So I'll just bring that closer and then extrude that in like that. I can also select this face here, and I'm going to duplicate this, and I can scale it up, maybe bring it back a little bit like that, and then I will extrude that over. All right, then I can select this face here. I'll duplicate this, and then this one I'm going to scale up a bit and kind of bring it up, and then I can extrude this over just like that. And then I'm going to add a loop cut here, so I'll add a loop cut there, just kind of drag it over. I can go right here to the vertex select, and I'm just going to select these two vertices here, and then I can double tap the G key to activate the edge slide, and I'm just going to bring that in so we kind of have that cool triangle look. Then I can select the entire object and kind of bring it out a little bit. Maybe select these again and double tap the G key, kind of edge slide that back. And then I think I will duplicate this again, make another one, and then duplicate this again. And this one I could maybe just scale up. So something like that. All right, and then I want to add another sci-fi detail here. So I'm going to go to the face select, just select this face, and I can duplicate it, bring it over there, and then I can just like extrude this out to fill the rest of that area there. I can also select the face here, and I can inset that, and I'll bring it in, and then I can extrude it back into the wall there. All right, and then I can select this face, the interface there. I'll duplicate this, bring it over, maybe scale it down, and I can extrude that out there. I can also duplicate this again. If I go right here to the vertex select, I just want to select these two vertices right here, so on the very end of it, and I can double tap the G key, and I can just make that a bit smaller, and then press the L key to select the linked vertices. and I'm just going to extrude that over there. Select this one here, I'll duplicate this, bring it down, and then I can extrude the entire thing down to kind of fill the rest of that area. And then just like we did with these other triangles, I think it would be cool to add another triangle here, kind of keeping with the same theme. So we have some triangles there, and then I want to add another one here. So I'm going to again use the knife tool just like that, and then I can use the knife tool again, and I'm going to cut another one. And then what I'm going to do is press the L key to select the linked vertices, and then I can just deselect these two faces. So now everything else is selected except those faces, so I can just delete the faces, and then if I just select these two faces, I can extrude them back in just like that. And then what I'm going to do is go here to the edge select, and I'm just going to select this edge, and I want to add kind of a cool effect where it's kind of rotating down just to give it some more interest. So I will press Ctrl B, that'll add a bevel, and I can scroll my mouse wheel out. Something like that is pretty cool. And then also what I'm going to do down here is just select one of these cylinders, and I will duplicate the cylinder, and I'm going to scale it down. I'm also going to rotate it on the Z-axis, and I'll scale it down a little bit. And I just want to put one of these circles here. And if I go to front view, I can kind of rotate this so it kind of aligns with the rotation of that face there. Then I can select the face there, and I can just inset that face and then extrude that back in. And I can duplicate this and bring it over. So now we have some more sci-fi details. All right, so I'm going to go back to object mode, and then I want to add a bevel modifier to this object to bevel all the edges, because the edges shouldn't be super sharp. They should have a tiny little bit of a bevel, and that'll make it look more realistic, and it'll give kind of a little bit of shine on the edge. So I'm going to select the object, and then let's click on add modifier, and under generate I can add the bevel modifier. I can just kind of zoom in here to see the bevel taking effect, and I just want to go down here to the bevel. I'm going to turn the segments up a bit, maybe to like 4, and then I can also just change the offset. So I want that offset to be pretty small, so maybe something like that, and then just shade the object smooth. But now you can see there's a tiny little bit of a bevel all over the object. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other objects. So like right up here, I can select this object here. Let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the bevel modifier, and then I can just turn the segments up maybe to like 3 or 4. I will shade the object smooth, and then right here on the amount, I can just like turn this way down so that the bevel is pretty small. And then also let's do the same thing here on the floor. So select the floor. Again, we can add the bevel modifier. I'm just going to zoom in here. Let's turn the segments up to maybe 3 or 4, and I can shade the object smooth, and we can go into the camera view and just see how that is looking. All right, so with that finished, this is going to wrap it up for part 1 of the tutorial. So I hope you've been enjoying this, and thank you for watching. And definitely let me know in the comments whether you like this more intermediate level tutorial, or if you prefer the very slow step-by-step beginner tutorials. This is just something that I'm trying out, so I definitely like your feedback in the comments. So in the next part, in part 2, we are going to be finishing up all the modeling, so we're going to be modeling the doors at the end of the tunnel. And I'll be uploading 1 to 2 parts each day of the tutorial series on my YouTube channel, so when the next part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen, and I'll also have the link in the description. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in part 2.